Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living on this Monday morning? It's Monday, January 23rd, 2023, and we are coming to you live on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, as well as on Twitter at Torres Sports is where you can find me. Make sure to lock in there. And thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm joined today by my good friend Spencer McLaughlin, host of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12. How we doing, buddy?
We are doing dandy on this Monday morning. Just always ready to rise and grind. Speaking of Locked On Pac-12, I just got off of a 2-hour casual Zoom conversation call with a guy talking nothing but realignment and where the Pac-12 could go. So that's what I'm doing on a Monday. What's everybody else doing?
Yeah, let us know how you guys are doing and what's on your mind over in the live chat. Like I said, we're on YouTube with the live chat, and we got some folks already here. We got Brooks chiming in about some of his thoughts on the transfer portal additions. Gerard Berry is here saying, let's get this program started. As you know, we're a program podcast, of course. But man, it feels good to be back. I don't know if it's just because we haven't done a podcast together in a little bit, or maybe it's because my 49ers are heading to the NFC Championship, and Diamador Lenore got a pick yesterday. Eric Armstead also missed a surefire tackle. That probably should have been a safety on Dak Prescott.
Well, but if he makes the tackle, we all know it's roughing the passer, so who cares?
Probably because the NFL.
It's the NFL.
But maybe that's why I'm doing well. But I'm just stoked to be back here. Before we get into the show, I did have someone comment that the audio was a little iffy on the last show, so I did order a new cord for my microphone. I think that might have been why it kind of got bent out of shape a little bit. But talked to Spencer before the show, and I think he said that we're sounding all right. So we're gonna keep it rolling, and hopefully it sounds crisp for you guys. So today's show is going to be a fun one. Spencer said we got him for about 45 minutes. We'll see if we end up utilizing all of that or not. But in today's show, we're going to be talking some transfer portal because that's definitely an interesting aspect of recruiting. We've seen a lot of people exiting the Oregon program, and we've also seen 9 additions so far as things stand right now in the 2023 recruiting class for Oregon. But before we talk about some of these guys, Spencer, I kind of just wanted to throw this out there to get the show started and get some of your thoughts. I feel like the approach for the transfer portal this cycle is maybe a little bit different than it was in the 2022 cycle for Dan Lanning and the Ducks, because you'll remember when Dan Lanning got hired at Oregon, it was right before that first early signing period, and he kind of had to scramble a little bit, and I thought he did a really good job of keeping that 2022 class together and then adding some pieces, getting former commits Jaleel Florence and Dave Yulee back in the fold. So I feel like the approach is a little bit different. Last year, he had to use the transfer portal to really supplement maybe some of the areas that they couldn't address at the high school level in 2022 because of the coaching change. But now I feel like he can take it even up a notch, even further, because the transfer portal guys are solid and they're all filling needs. And then you have a really, really strong prep class, most of which is already on campus.
Yeah, I think the portal mindset has been upgrade, improve, get better, address weaknesses. And that's kind of what the good programs in the country, and Oregon's program, of course, has, really been in terms of a mindset for going into the transfer portal. They are looking at players to fill a position of need right now. And it's, I think encouraging to see Lanning doing both. Adding quality players, and a lot of them from the prep ranks, but also utilizing the portal. I think that's where the best schools in the country are going to be. Some places like Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State probably don't have to hit the portal as hard because they recruit just so many blue chip players that, this guy leaves, he goes to a lower tier Power 5 school or a G5, and somebody else has to fill that void, but they've got a player who's capable of doing that. I think the tier of programs that Oregon is a member of, which is kind of that, waiting to jump back into the national championship game, which is certainly possible. I know the schedule just dropped. I don't expect that in year 2. But with Lanning at the helm, I do feel like that is definitely a possibility and long-term goal. But not consistently up there, right? It's not like Oregon is playoff or bust every year. There are only a few that are up there, right? Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State. I think Michigan now, after back-to-back appearances, is probably, anything short of a playoff appearance is a disappointment. There's not really any there. Oregon's kind of in that next tier. Consistently top 10, 15. Conference title contender is an expectation year in and year out. Sniff around the playoff and try to have all the chips fall into their basket. I think those sorts of programs have to do both more than the highest of high tier schools, because you just have so many needs. I mean, we can talk about football year round, Max, with our shows, because there's so much to it, right? You've got 11 players on offense, 11 players on defense. You've got way more subs than you need sub. I'm talking like literal subs during the game who see meaningful playing time than in other sports. There are just so many different players that you need, and I think it's a wise approach for Lanning to look at it and say, here's a guy who can help us now, and here's a guy who can help us in the future.
Yeah, and I think to your point about kind of Oregon's approach and maybe how that compares to some of these other schools, depending on where they are in the college football hierarchy. Another thing is that I think a difference between Oregon and some of those top tier programs that we've seen, like the Alabamas, like the Michigans, and certainly like the Georgias, is that they're both schools, Oregon and all those other ones, are getting really good recruits from the prep ranks. But I don't think that it's much of an argument that those top tier programs are having more freshmen play from the second they get to campus, because they are that good. And maybe sometimes other guys need a little bit more coaching to get them along, or sometimes they're just ready to go. So I think that it's kind of a mixture of coaching and development, and then just having dudes that are ready to go from the jump. So just thought that was kind of an interesting piece of the conversation that we could introduce as we navigate into the portal waters again. We're going to be talking about the guys that Oregon has already landed, but Oregon was still hosting some guys over the weekend out of the transfer portal. Brooks talking here with this comment about how he loves the additions that Oregon's made from the transfer portal. And one name that we're tracking right now following a visit to Eugene this weekend is former Ole Miss safety Tysheem Johnson. And I think that a lot of these guys that come in to visit from the portal, particularly guys that are coming from the SEC, areas that Oregon's looking to push into more, certainly easier to get SEC caliber guys out of the transfer portal right now than out of the prep ranks, is I think that they're very intentional about guys that they're bringing out to campus, right? We had that weekend when they landed Birch, Evan Williams, and Connor Soley, and those guys were all on campus and for visits before they committed, and Oregon got all of them in a clean sweep, perfect trifecta. But I think that's another interesting kind of thing to think about, is that they're very purposeful about bringing guys out of the portal onto these visits, because you're not going to bring them out unless you think you have a realistic shot.
Yeah, and the name that everyone's following on that front right now in terms of visits and our interest is Nicholas Harbor, and that's a big name to watch for a number of reasons. But the Tysheem Johnson thing is interesting. Steve Stevens, Jamal Hill both announced that they're coming back. I don't think you can say with any certainty that either is locked into a starting role in 2023. It's hard to imagine that guys with that much experience will, not play or struggle to see the field, and that they would have come back if they, didn't have a good chance to play a lot. I still wonder if one of them ends up transferring after spring football, because there are so many bodies in that room, some of whom we don't really know anything about and some of whom we do. You bring in a fifth-year player like Evan Williams from the portal. By the way, someone just asked about Harbor. I have heard that he's not in Colorado. Doesn't mean Coach Prime couldn't come in and swoop, but I saw something from, I think it was Wilt Fong on 24/7 saying no, he's not there at this point in time. But you just look at the safeties room. It's got a lot of depth. It's got a lot of experience. I don't know that there's a ton of high-level talent in there. And I think if Peyton Bowen had stayed committed to Oregon, he would have had a chance to play right away. Maybe you don't add Evan Williams if you get Peyton Bowen. That's kind of the trade-off we might be looking at going forward. But if you imagine that Williams is probably Oregon's starting free safety, he's a little bit of a smaller body than Bennett, so I don't think he plays that sort of nickel position or third safety on the field, who's kind of primarily in the box. I just look at the rest of the guys that they've got there. You got Steve Stevens, you got Jamal Hill. We don't know what Brian Addison's doing yet. You got Evan Williams, and then you have a bunch of freshmen who are in there as well. You got Trajan Williams, you got Tyler Turner, you got Cody DeCamera coming in. The last two will be true freshmen this year. You never know if one of those guys will pop in spring football, but I just don't see a lot of playing time right now. I don't see a lot of secured playing time. So I feel like what they're doing with the safety and looking at a guy like Tysheem Johnson is, we need to upgrade at this position, which they do. They need to get more, and that doesn't mean that, one of Hill or Stevens couldn't grow a lot for this year, but I think it does mean, at the very least, they want to have a lot of bodies in the room for competition to try and bring out the best of the players they do have in there, because I think Addison was probably the best of the bunch, and he did a number of really good things this year, and I think he's the most explosive athlete of the group. But would I say that even he's locked into a starting position? No, I think you could beat him out. I think he'd be the toughest to do that for. But I think it's the most intriguing position group right now to watch in the coming weeks leading up to spring ball for the Ducks, because I think there are just so many different ways you could go.
Yeah, the safety position is certainly an interesting one to kind of sink your teeth into, especially when you look at the numbers, right? Because they had a lot of rotation last year, but it didn't really feel like, there was a dude who's like, okay, every time he comes on the field, like he's making something happen. Like he needs to be on the field more. It was kind of just like, we're getting some flashes and some good plays here and there from a number of guys. So maybe that's why it was a little bit more difficult to have someone solidify that role. And if you get a guy like Tysheem Johnson, maybe the staff, and I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about him, but maybe the staff feels like he is a guy who is an instant upgrade over some of those players mentioned. But Brian Addison is someone I'm definitely interested to see what he does in terms of his plans for 2023. And then a lot of those guys, they're, I don't want to say that they're old, but they have been at Oregon for a long time. So you also have to find that balance of, okay, hey, we got to get these young guys along too, and maybe look a little bit more towards the future. So those are just some of the thoughts I had on Tysheem Johnson. Didn't want to spend too much time on him because we got a lot of people to get to, but just wanted to leave it open.
Yeah, and one way to think about the safeties room for this year, when you're considering like, oh well, this guy's experienced, he's a solid player, he's a good recruit or something like that. Just ask yourself this question: how many explosive or impact plays do you remember from the safeties position this year? I got a couple, and they all come from Brian Addison. Bennett Williams had an interception that, was huge in the Utah game. One of them was tipped up in the air, and I guess anybody really could have made that other play. But one of them was good. But that's kind of it, right? I think Addison is pretty clearly the best of the bunch. I think he's the best athlete, flies around a lot, hits hard, covers a good amount of ground, good length as well, a couple interceptions, but the other guys, I just can't think of a lot of moments where I thought, man, good thing that guy was there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with those points, and I feel like that's a group that was good but not great, and certainly a spot that they're looking to upgrade at for sure, and that's why they're navigating the transfer portal to find some of those guys. So let's kind of turn the conversation a little bit to the guys that Oregon does have, many of which, possibly all of which, I think are actually already enrolled. Now that I think about it, I'm pretty confident that they all are. We got a bunch. We got 9 guys that have announced their commitment and are now on campus and enrolled at Oregon. As we start to break this down and talk about the haul for the Ducks. And I think the conversation really starts with Jordan Birch, right? And it makes sense why, because he's the biggest name that they were able to get. Former 5-star out of high school, ties to Lanning, freak athlete type of a deal. And certainly fills a position of need. And I think that one point that I would maybe bring to the discussion is that even if they had DJ Johnson and Brendan Dorlus both coming back, I think you still want to get a guy like Jordan Birch, because they just haven't had that star power, not from a ranking or rating standpoint, but just a dude who's going to command that kind of attention from their opposing offensive lines. And the line of scrimmage play on defense, pass rush specifically, has just been very underachieving for a number of seasons, even dating back to Kayvon Thibodeau when he was at Oregon. He was great, but where's the rest of the group? He's not. You can't rely on one guy to generate a pass rush, and I think that's one of the biggest reasons I like Jordan Burch, because of what he brings to the table and the flexibility that he allows the rest of that offense, the defensive line.
Plug and play starter is the easiest way to describe him. There's not going to be I think, big competition for edge play for him. When you factor in that DJ Johnson is there, and that the starting edge players from 2022, Mace Funa and DJ Johnson, you have to look at them and say that wasn't good enough. I mean, they did some good things, had good moments, but the consistency for 12 games, generating pressures and ultimately sacking the quarterback and being disruptive on non-running plays. I thought both were actually quite good against the run. When you go back and watch some of the games and highlights, they do a lot of great things on that front. And Oregon's run defense, save for one game, was also very good this year. But I think you just have to be willing to look at guys who and are familiar and comfortable with and have enjoyed watching, and be able to say that it would just got to do better. Just got to do better. And I think Burch gives you that potential. And I think the possibility of lining him up at one defensive end and Mateo Uyunglele at the other as a true freshman, I think that's very realistic for the Ducks heading into 2023. And I think that's a good thing too, because I think Mateo, may not be a full-time starter right away. Kayvon Thibodeau wasn't even. He was kind of a pass rush specialist. But then by the time the end of the season came around, he took over the Pac-12 championship game. He dominated in the Rose Bowl as well, with a number of pressures that led to stops and an interception. So he is that sort of guy. I don't think anybody is Kayvon Thibodeau, because there's just one of him, and he's redonkulous. But I think that's why you want to continue to pursue talent at that position. I think right now your starting edge players are probably Burch at one end, and then a mix of Mateo and Mace Funa at the other.
Yeah, and Burch, I feel like, to kind of just wrap up the discussion on him, I feel like he's kind of almost a cherry on top in this portal haul, or in this 2023 class up to this point, and it's not finished yet, right? You talked about guys like Nicholas Harbor that they're going after out in the DC area. Did a little bit of digging while you were talking, and it looks like Wiltfong said that Oregon is going to be in home with Nicholas Harbor today, which is certainly an interesting development ahead of his final official visit, which will be to Oregon this upcoming weekend. And then you also have Roderick Pleasant in the 2023 class out of Unipero Serra High School in Gardena. I'm going to try to make my way out to there to talk to him to preview his college commitment. Got Oregon, USC, UCLA, Boston College, and Cal all still in the picture there. But to go back to the edge conversation with Burch and Mateo, Mateo was one of those guys that I got to watch a lot this year, and I feel like he's really polished from some of his pass rushing standpoint, and just the sheer size of his frame. I think he's around 6'5", 250 plus. So he's only going to continue to improve. He was out in Hawaii for the Poly Bowl, but he's already on campus for Oregon. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see kind of where he lines up. And he has a lot of potential, I think, because of the kind of athlete that he is. He started as a two-way standout at Bosco for much of his high school career, but this past season when I got to see him, he was really focusing on defense, and then they rolled him out, play some offense, play some tight end, and flex kind of a deal against Mater Dei, and he shined and really helped them win that game over Mater Dei at the end of the year. So Mateo is a guy I'm incredibly excited about. So much potential there, and I think he's certainly someone that could be seeing a lot of rotation as a true freshman. But you make a good point about even KT didn't start full-time as a true freshman, so
he was a pass rush specialist to begin, because that's what he was known for, but he had to develop the rest of his game. I don't think Mateo will be any different.
Yeah, exactly. So I think another thing that's going to aid in his development and kind of transition to the college level, look at how deep the defensive line is. Maybe not so much at the edge position as you'd maybe want, but you certainly have bodies and some production there that can, I think, where you're not in a position where you have to, have Mateo out there for a ton of snaps. Because I think that's a huge difference. That's definitely worth a discussion for anybody coming from the high school level to college. Is sure they're great, but are you starting them because they're your best guy and they're pushing other guys for playing time, or are you starting them because, hey, we don't have a whole lot of options here that we're super confident in? Like I think about Thomas Graham at cornerback when he was at Oregon. Thomas Graham and Diameter Lenore, they both played a lot of football early, and that defense was rough. I mean, just when they got there. So they obviously carved out their roles and proved to be pretty solid contributors. But I think that's another point worth making.
Yeah, it takes time, and this is year 2 for Lanning. Still, really the first full year where you'll have a recruiting cycle and transfer portal season, in addition to a full off season where they've been there the entire time. But the expectation, at least in my view, is the defense needs to be better. I'm not expecting them necessarily to dominate in 2023, because I don't know if they have the secondary players to do that. We'll see. Maybe guys can grow and surprise us, improve, or really pop. But to be a great defense in the NFL or college ranks in 2023, you need a great pass rush and defensive line, and you need a great secondary. And it also helps when you have a really speedy linebacker like Fred Warner, which is what the 49ers have. I mean, that guy's
Love
ridiculous.
Him.
That guy's ridiculous. But they're not making a lot of those guys out there. But there's so many areas where I'm interested to see how the Ducks defense can improve, and I think they've added some personnel. I'm really intrigued to see what Justin Jacobs is going to bring, because that's an Iowa football program that values defense above all else. And he was going to be a starter for them this year. They were expecting he'd be back and be a starter next year, as in 2023. And Oregon's able to snag him out of the portal. So I'm think most intrigued to see him play in terms of transfers who are being slept on a little bit, right? Birch gets all the attention he should. He should be Oregon's best transfer. I think number 2 could be Justin Jacobs, because of the void that's being left at linebacker with, the guys who departed and, the few players that are returning at that position group. There's not a ton of production / experience that's there. So I think that's a void the defense needs to fill.
Yeah, so let's talk about Justin Jacobs a little bit, because I'm pretty excited about him as well. And then maybe we can shift a little bit and look at some of these questions and comments.
Yeah.
I think that'd be fun. So yeah, Justin Jacobs is an interesting guy because you kind of said it a little bit. Iowa is a program that definitely prides itself on its defense and certainly in the trenches and along that defensive front. And part of what makes Justin Jacobs so intriguing, he's coming off of an injury, I want to say, so he maybe didn't get to play a whole lot last year, but he kind of gets lost in the mix.
I think he only appeared in like 2 games.
Yeah. So that's. Maybe I can double check that, or one of us can check that while the other one's talking. But what I was going to say is that he kind of gets lost in the mix because of Jack Campbell. I mean, Jack Campbell was a stud for the Hawkeyes defense. And to have a guy like Justin Jacobs come to Oregon, I think he definitely fills some of that need along the inside when you're losing a guy like Noah Sewell. And one of his biggest strengths, Spencer, is one of Oregon's biggest weaknesses from a year ago, and that's coverage. Just because he is such a talented athlete, it's going to be really important for him to be covering tight ends and running backs out of the backfield. That's a big need for Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi on this defense going in next season. And I think Justin Jacobs is one of the biggest reasons that you should be optimistic that they can try to make that leap to the next level in regards to coverage.
Yeah, and there are a lot of schematical things that you can talk about with how the defense was rolled out this year. But I think where I got frustrated at times was their reliance on a pretty soft zone coverage made for some easy pitch and catches for the other team, or just kind of wasn't working super well, in addition to the defensive line not getting any pressure. But I wonder if they were more zone heavy than maybe they wanted to be, because of what they had in coverage at the linebacker position. And we saw them trying to find the right combination of guys, whether it's Jeffrey Bossa, Noah Sewell, or Justin Flo. They just couldn't get guys in there who they felt confident in enough from a coverage standpoint to match up man-to-man with a tight end or a wide receiver. And I mean, it's tough for any linebacker really to match up with a wide receiver. It's what makes Fred Warner so ridiculous. But that's in theory why you have that extra safety in the box. Who, it was Bennett Williams this year. I really wonder if they'll slide Jeffrey Bossa back to safety because he struggled at linebacker this year. But I think the reason that he stayed there, Bossa that is because he's better in coverage, because or at least in theory, because he's more nimble. He's smaller, but he struggled big time against the run. He got moved around by offensive linemen a lot. So I think there are a lot of different ways that could go. And what you can't lose in the shuffle here is how good Keith Brown looked in the Holiday Bowl. I mean, he was, Oregon's best defensive player in the front seven in that game, aside from Mace Funa, who was the Holiday Bowl MVP. Like, if he's one of your linebackers and Jacobs is the other, I think there will be a sufficient amount of rotation there because it is always going to be matchup dependent. And if a team is coming out 5 wide, yeah, you maybe don't want to have Jacobs and Brown on the field depending on what, Jacobs' true coverage abilities are. And I don't think we can fully evaluate that at this point in time because we just haven't seen him play enough football. I mean,
Sure.
Iowa hasn't, we haven't. He just unfortunately hasn't had the chance to. So hopefully he's able to stay healthy and we see what he's capable of. But he's certainly a different sort of physical makeup. I think he's like 3 inches taller than either Sewell or Flo, who are both like 6'1" and in the 240 to 50 range. I think Sewell at one point was like 260. Jacobs is like 6'4", 240. Like he's almost built kind of like an edge player, but he plays middle linebacker. So I'm fascinated to see what he can bring to the table.
Yeah, so let's get to some of these questions. One of them coincidentally kind of hits right on what we were talking about right now and will allow us to talk about another player. This question comes from Andrew. Andrew asks, guys, are any of these transfer linebackers skilled at pass coverage? Because Sewell and Flo were so awful that I think just about anyone is an upgrade. Yeah, I mean, I think that anyone on that Oregon defense will tell you that the pass coverage wasn't where it needed to be last year, a season ago. And now with Sewell and Flo both departing, I think we can all agree that Sewell is the bigger loss of the two, with Flo now at Arizona. But I wanted to talk about this other linebacker that they got because I think he also helps in this area, and that's former Arizona State linebacker Connor Soley, who is definitely a little bit on the smaller side, right?
I think it's pronounced Sully, is what I've come to understand.
Okay,
Sully,
yeah,
Sully Sullenberger, which is fantastic in my view.
Yeah, I did talk to a source that told me it was Solely, but we can just keep rolling. I did like the joke.
We know who we're talking about. That I had an Arizona State guy tell me it was Sully.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. We all know who we're talking about though. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's listed on the 2023 or I guess 2022. He's still on the Arizona site for some reason. The Arizona State roster at 6'1", 220 pounds. So definitely a smaller linebacker. But I think obviously one of the big upsides that comes with that is that he can move. At least that's the assumption, right? You would think with a guy of his physical frame. So, it's an experienced guy. I think a little bit of a lower rated recruit than Oregon has kind of traditionally gone after at linebacker. A former 3-star out of Saguaro, which is an Arizona powerhouse. But I think that's a reason to be confident in what he has as a player. I was able to ask a little bit about him, and I'm going to see if I can find the message to try to bring some more insight here. But, strong work ethic, good football IQ, having a feel for a game is obviously huge. And you get that by playing a lot of football, which he definitely did at Arizona State, was a redshirt senior this past year, I believe. So I think that he's a solid addition, someone that maybe flies a little bit under the radar in terms of guys.
Special teams.
Yeah, so I think that he's someone that I think can definitely help push this group that doesn't have a ton of proven production. Aside from, Keith Brown's your most experienced guy that was already at Oregon, I want to say, with Jackson LeDuc going to Nevada. I think that linebacker is definitely a position that they need to retool a little bit. And who was the other guy I was going to say? I was going to mention that Jerry Mixon is the only true linebacker that they signed from the prep rankings.
Yeah,
he was on campus for his official visit over the weekend, and he's someone that I know they're excited about. He's playing basketball, that's why he's not enrolled yet. But Mixon should be a solid addition. Not sure if he plays early necessarily, but like we've kind of been talking about, I don't think the depth is as strong as they would like. So maybe there's an opportunity there, especially if Bossa ends up moving back to the secondary. I had to make sure to hit that one.
Well, you have to remember there's also Harrison Taggart and Devin Jackson
True.
in that linebacker room who we haven't really seen. I like Jackson's potential because he has high end speed. I think if you just give it a surface level thought, you'd say, oh no, they could definitely use more linebacker depth. But then as you start going through and you remember that this is not a 4-3 or a 3-4, this is a 4-2-5. So you're only playing two linebackers at any point in time on the field, unless you're in a goal line package. Justin Jacobs, yeah, that's probably going to be a day one starter. Connor Sully, I would be surprised if he's a starting linebacker. I would not be surprised if he's a starting special teamser, or which is a word I just made up, or if he is a guy who plays that box safety role, right? The Bennett Williams hybrid linebacker safety position that I have long clamored for on my show and will continue to do for Jeffrey Bossa to play, because I think he's more well suited to play that spot. But you look at the linebackers they've got, it's Jacobs, and you've got Keith Brown in there, and they're seemingly going to stick with Bossa at linebacker. Sully's a hybrid guy, Jackson, Taggart, and now you go like, well, do they need more bodies in there? Or do guys just need to get a chance to show what they can do? Or do they just need to improve, right? And that first description applies to Jackson and Taggart, who were 2022 commits. The second category of needing to improve applies to Jeffrey Bossa, who graded very poorly on PFF this year. I think he had some nice things. He brings a lot to the table, right? One thing he was good at this year, really good at this year, especially against Arizona with Jaden DeLora, where he had, I think, one of his only sacks of the year. The other one came in the Holiday Bowl. He's a great quarterback spy guy. He's perfect for that, right? Matching up in a linebacker or on a running back, going into the flat, I think he's really adept at that. He's a solid tackler in space, but I thought took a step back from what he showed from his true freshman year. But he is the sort of body that you can put in the box and say, all right, you can make a play in the running game or in the passing game, but also we need you to spy the quarterback, and that's what he fits. And I wonder if maybe Sully is someone who's going to come in and fill that kind of role as well, because they're a very similar frame and body type, and Sully's very experienced in college football in general. So I'm curious how the playing time works out for those guys.
Yeah, maybe Jeffrey Bossa is a little bit of a wild card heading into next year. I mean, I think he's someone.
I think he's a huge wild card.
Who's for sure going to be on the field. It's just maybe they need to move him around a little bit, because I know that Lanning, when he got hired, he talked about how Bossa has that perfect blend of speed, athleticism, and tackling that you want in a linebacker. Let's shift to another question real quick that I think we can use to kind of hit on the position group as well. Mark's asking if there's any update on Coach Clem's Patriots interview. There's none that I'm aware of, but I think we could talk a little bit about Adrian Clem and then some of the guys that he was able to bring in this portal class with Junior Angelau, who comes over from Texas, and then arguably the top offensive tackle prospect available in the portal, Ajani Cornelius from Rhode Island. What do you think about those additions?
I think if Coach Clem were to get hired somewhere else, I'd be really bummed. I mean, really, that would be a significant loss to the offense in my view. And to be fair, we don't know exactly what he's capable of as an offensive line coach, though the numbers did improve. It's about, how the offense operates as well. But the offensive line coach is in conjunction with the offensive coordinator. It's under that same umbrella. That's why he's interviewing for the Patriots OC position. They were better somehow in 2022 than they were in 2021. And they were dominant in 2021. It's the only way, because we know how Mario Cristobal wants a football game to look when you win. It is what carried Oregon to 10 wins. And they didn't have to do quite as much. Like, they weren't as offensive line dependent in 2022, I don't think, but they were even better. They didn't allow as many sacks. They run blocked at an elite clip. there are just a lot of things that indicate, in addition to the caliber of recruits that he's brought in, right? Think about Josh Connerly, think about Junior Angelau, think about, even another guy like George Silva who's coming over in the portal from the junior college ranks. Like, there are a lot of big bodies that other Power 5 quality programs were after that Adrian Klemm ended up landing, and he's been really good in that front. And so the good news at this point in time is it's just been he interviewed, no other buzz. That's the good news for Duck fans right now. I'd be super bummed if he left.
Yeah, just to give some of my thoughts, I think that he's been a tremendous addition, to this coaching staff since he got to Oregon, both on the field and on the recruiting trail. And now I think this next season is an opportunity for him to, not that he really needs to, but sell himself even more or prove himself even more, because he's heading into the offseason with obviously this big challenge of guys like Forsyth, Bass, Walk, Sala, all gone. But you have Stephen Jones coming back after he was injured for much of the year. That's obviously a huge plus. Jackson Powers Johnson played a really good amount of football, kind of all over the offensive line. Really excited about.
JPJ is really good.
Super stoked about where he could help the Ducks. And you also have Marcus Harper, who I think didn't really get enough shine. I always talk about him when I think about last year's group. He, of course, stepped in for Jones when he got injured, and he didn't miss a beat last year. And he was talking about how he was constantly, preparing for this moment. I think it's been like 1,000 days, he said, or whatever, since he, contributed in like a meaningful capacity in his eyes. So this group has some proven production returning, but then you bring in Junior Angelau and Ajani Cornelius. I would probably think that Ajani projects to be the left tackle for Bo Nix. I think that's a big addition to probably a big piece, for Bo Nix to come back. He's like, hey, I was playing behind a great old line. Like, what are you guys going to do to, what's that picture looking like next year? And Ajani Cornelius is a really, really talented guy out of the portal that I think should absolutely be a plug and play guy. It's just a matter of kind of seeing where these guys fit in and what this group ultimately looks like, because you have Josh Connerly coming back. You also have, Dave Yulee, who was one of the stronger recruits in the 22 class, Faupe Laulaulu, who also got to get some reps last year. So I think that the additions of Angelau and Cornelius really help bridge the gap here, and I think give you some optimism that Oregon's offense can continue to be elite, both in the run and in the pass.
I wonder if it'll be Cornelius or Connerly who starts at left tackle.
I just think you don't want a guy that young necessarily starting at left tackle unless you have to, or unless he is just that much better than your other options.
Maybe, yeah. I just wonder what the plan would be there if you recruit a guy of that caliber and he's not starting in year 2.
Well, maybe he starts on the opposite side. I don't know. Could be Stephen Jones.
You could move one over to right tackle. But the other thing to remember with the offensive line is you think of the starting 5, but we have seen 7 to 8 linemen play regularly for the last couple of seasons. And I think that's existed over time more than people really realize. I've just started to notice it more in the last couple of years. But think of every offensive lineman who played meaningful, game-altering snaps this season. Alex Forsyth, Ryan Walk, Marcus Harper, Stephen Jones, Josh Connerly, Big Sala, Jackson Powers Johnson.
TJ Bass.
TJ Bass, who started at left tackle. That's 8. So as you look at what the offensive line is shaping up to be, I feel really good about where they are. Like, it's hard to say they could be as good as they were in 2022 because you had Forsyth leading the charge, and man, that guy is good. And you had Bass at left tackle. He rarely, if ever, got beat. I think the only time he did was against Laiatu Latu, who's a stud from UCLA. So I like where the offensive line's at because I've watched JPJ. He's really good. He grades really well. He looks really good. He can also play either guard or center. He might be the starting center. Angelau is a guy who's played tackle and guard. I think Cornelius looks like a tackle. You got Silva in there, but then Iuli could be a guy who gets some more snaps this year. He was kind of the, number, if you got 2 starting guards, he was like the number 4 guard, I think, this year, probably 4 or 5. He might move up the depth chart. I feel good about, where the offensive line is at, and that's why I don't want Clem to leave.
Yeah, so we're on the same page there as far as the value that Clem provides. at Oregon. And I also think, just to wrap that discussion up on him, I feel like just from a career standpoint, it seems kind of odd to come down from the NFL ranks to college for just a year, have the success that he had as a West Coast guy, mind you, although we know he has ties to Belichick and the Patriots after playing some of his NFL career there. But that's maybe another thing to consider is, does he want to go back to the NFL after getting back to the college level and, just really kicking some butt, honestly. And then we got Mikey G's comment here talking about Clem, saying, I remember the haters clowning Clem early in the year. He made a great O-line, outstanding, and landed huge recruits. No doubt that is exactly what he did. We got 5 more minutes left in the show, so there's only a couple guys we haven't gotten to just yet. Let's talk about the receivers. You got Trayshawn Holden coming over from Alabama. Definitely had some good production there. I want to say about 6 touchdowns last season while with the Crimson Tide, a guy that Oregon recruited heavily coming out of high school out of Narbonne down here in the Southern California area. And then you have Tez Johnson, who is Bo Nix's adopted brother, who comes over from Troy. A couple different body types here. I think that, Trayshawn Holden, 6'3", 200-pound range is, your more, big play, possession, 50-50 ball kind of guy, but he can definitely make something happen with the ball in his hands after the catch. And then Tez Johnson is definitely a little bit more of a slider frame kind of guy. I want to say he's 5'9", 5'10", and like around 175 or so, but was the top receiver at Troy.
He's not even 175. He's listed at like 150.
Oh no, yeah, it was 150.
Yeah.
I was looking.
He's
247 has him at 138 on their.
He is a skinny
page,
dude. He's a skinny dude and a nimble athlete. I'm most curious how he gets incorporated in the offense, because I love Chris Hudson in more ways than one. I think he's a great blocker, and I don't think Tez can match him in that front because he's just not as big. He can't be quite as physical. I think he is a little bit more explosive of an athlete, but at what point this year did you watch Chris Hudson and how he was using the offense and think, yeah, it's a position Oregon needs to upgrade? I didn't think that a single time.
Oh, yeah.
So I understand you bring in Bo Nix's brother. He's been a very good college player at the G5 level. I think those two are battling it out for playing time.
Yeah, and Chris Hudson's done nothing to, lose his snaps, right? I think maybe we view Tez Johnson as more of a depth piece right now, which is something Oregon needs.
Which is fine. Which is totally fine. Because the only thing against Hudson, he had the one drop against Cal.
Yeah.
And then he came back and made plays in that game that were instrumental to us moving the ball and scoring. I'm a big Chris Hudson fan.
Yeah, so I think that these additions, Trayshawn Holden definitely figures to be your plug-and-play guy that I think should be a starter alongside the likes of Troy Franklin and Chris Hudson. And then Tez Johnson, I think, definitely adds some depth to that room, a room that loses Chase Cota, the number 2 wideout from a year ago, and Dante Thornton, who definitely wasn't used enough at Oregon. But, Chase Cota was really solid. So, it's just kind of something that happens sometimes. You got to find ways to get guys on the field, and that's not always going to, be where they want to be utilized. The last guy that I want to talk about, Spencer, before we get you out of here, is Kyrie Jackson, the second Alabama transfer for the Oregon Ducks, and Dan Lanning, cornerback, who comes over and really should play a significant role right off the bat, depending on what else they do in the transfer portal. I think cornerbacks are a position that they'd be wise to maybe try to add another guy if they can, although we know that numbers are kind of tight. But I think that he should be someone that's a prime candidate to come in and bolster that room with Christian Gonzalez heading off to the NFL. And then you have some young guys that are coming in, waiting in the wings. Jaleel Florence played a lot last year, the most of any 2022 corner, I want to say. But you also have Bridges, Dante Manning, Darren Barkins, Avante Dickerson. But as you kind of work your way down that list, there's not a ton of production and not a lot of really proven ability so far. Although I think that, guys like Dante Manning took a step in the right direction this year.
Same thing with the safeties group, Max. If I asked you right now, Oregon takes field to play Portland State, who are the starting corners?
Let's go.
Is the correct response.
Well, no, I was just starting. You didn't give me time. I was going to say Kyrie Jackson.
I was asking that rhetorically to make a point.
Okay.
The opportunity is there for Jackson or any of those DBs to claim the starting job. And as the season went on, I think Triquez Bridges' growth was profound in a great way for the defense. But would I say that he's, as dominant as Gonzo was at any point in the year? No. So does that mean his job is solidified? Absolutely not. Could he be a starter? Yeah, totally could. And I mean, you bring in a guy like Kyrie Jackson from a program like Alabama, you would think that is for him to start right away. But I think there are some other talented guys in the room, and he could be a depth piece. They could want to have him as a nickel corner more, which is, something Dante Manning did a little bit of this year when they put 3 DBs on the field, or 3 corners on the field specifically. Could do that with Jaleel Florence. He played in that number 3 corner role as well. I don't think, the world of Kyrie Jackson. I don't think nothing about him either. I think it's a guy who will have the opportunity to compete for playing time. But if you told me that he's not one of the transfers who starts right away, I would not be surprised, nor would I be surprised if you told me he was a day one starter and you had Triquez or Dante or Jaleel on the other side. I'm a big Jaleel Florence fan, by the way. Big Jaleel Florence fan and the potential he's got. But I also wonder, all these bodies, all these names right now, the portal is closed. Guys could still announce they're going to go in the portal. They just can't formally do it. Mm-hmm. I don't think we've seen the last of players leaving. I think we've mostly seen the last of players entering. But more guys are going to have to leave, whether they get asked to go out. I mean, it's happened before in college sports where a coach sits you down and says, look, we think you're a good player. You're a good kid. You worked hard for us, but you're not going to see the field here. We just have other guys who we feel better about, and it's in your best interests to do that. A coach cannot make a player do that, and they're not going to revoke a scholarship, but players will be encouraged going forward because they're still over the limit, and there are just so many bodies at some position groups, particularly in the secondary, honestly, where I look and go, okay, not everybody can play here. Some guys might be okay being a number 2, and when a guy goes down with an injury or has to come out of the game, he gets an opportunity to play. Some guys might be okay with that. All right. But there are only so many snaps at every position group, and there are a lot of names at some of those spots right now. I think the defensive backfield is where you'll see more transfers in the future.
Yeah, we'll probably expect more guys to leave after spring football concludes. And guys have more of an idea of where they stand in the depth chart. And Oregon did add some other guys from the prep ranks in 23, most notably Dalen Austin out of Long Beach Poly, who I think is one of the best corners in that 23 class. Cole Martin is already on campus to get coached up by his dad, Demetrius Martin. But should be an interesting one as we get to continue tracking and then see what unfolds with Oregon's management of their roster. Spencer, before we get you out of here, where can people find more of you and what you have going on in the college football space?
Hosting Locked On Ducks and Locked On Pac-12 5 days a week, YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm also on Twitter at Smalls_55. Many of you know that already. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Max, always good to talk to you, my guy.
Thanks for being on here, man. Always feels good to chop it up with you. Always have an awesome time. If you guys want to find more of me and what I have going on, follow me on Twitter at mtorresports. That's the best way to lock in with me. And then go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. And go ahead and leave a like and comment while you're at it. Love growing the community. And then share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, with other Duck fans. That's the best way to grow the community and spread the word. But until next time, thank you guys so much. Thanks to Spencer for coming on. And you've been listening to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.
Go Ducks.